Aegon Targaryen stood upon the prow of his flagship, wind whipping his silver-blonde hair across his brow. The spray of the narrow sea brushed his cheeks as he narrowed his violet eyes toward the western horizon. Dawn's first light reflected on the water in shimmering ribbons, hinting at the land beyond, the 7 kingdoms of Westeros fractured and worn by centuries of petty wars. Once he had harbored a dream of conquest, a dream of uniting these kingdoms by the fire and blood of House Targaryen. But in the quiet hours of the night, in the labyrinth of his own thoughts, Aegon had begun to see a different vision, not the ashes of war or the trail of subjugated lords bowing in fear, but a tapestry of kingdoms bound by mutual respect, raised as equals rather than ground beneath the dragon's wings. As his ship drew nearer to the mouth of Blackwater Bay, those musings solidified in him. He had left behind Dragonstone with his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, and with 3 dragons who could turn the tide of any battle. The plan his ancestors might have demanded was to unleash their fire and carve out an empire. Yet in the swirl of pre-dawn darkness, as the hull of the ship cut through choppy waters and the gulls wheeled overhead, Aegon found himself wondering if there was a nobler path, one that could usher in peace without salt and smoke and endless rivers of blood. He sensed movement at his side. His elder sister, Visenya, appeared in the half-light, steel-eyed and solemn, her hand resting on the hilt of Dark Sister at her hip. She knew him as well as he knew himself, and she had read the changes in him these past few weeks, the hesitation to declare himself king. They had once made grand plans, forging the great Targaryen seat in Westeros. Yet she had seen him linger over letters from lords who asked for compromise. She had watched him trace the shape of a new realm in the air, one less bound by the fear of dragons. Visenya was a warrior, fierce as any man in battle, but she had always been fiercely devoted to the Targaryen name. She studied Aegon now, her expression inscrutable. "There it is," she said after a long silence, her voice low and measured, as though she contemplated not just the land ahead but the untested future. "Westeros. Each kingdom with its own proud history. They will not kneel easily." Aegon nodded. "We will see if they must kneel at all." She flicked her gaze to his face. "What do you mean by that?" He turned from her to the horizon again. "I had a dream before we left Dragonstone. It was an unsettling one. Dragons soared above 100,000 corpses, men and women alike, their banners burnt and fallen to ash. That was the future if we approach Westeros as tyrants. I have grown weary of the old ways. If we come to unite these lands, should we demand that all treat us as masters? Must a realm be forged by violence alone?" Visenya said nothing, but her gloved hand tightened upon the ship's railing. For a moment, a hush stretched between them, and the only sound was the gulls cawing overhead, the wind in the sails, the creak of wood and rope. Her stern visage held a certain tension. She had always believed in Targaryen destiny, in the might of dragons, but Aegon's words set them upon a different course. He had not shared the fullness of his plan with her, for he himself had not fully shaped it. But a glimmer of possibility took root in his heart. When Rhaenys joined them, stepping lightly across the deck, her arrival was heralded by a bright laugh and an airy rustle of silk. Rhaenys was the gentler sister, the dreamer, whose heart ran deep with empathy, and it was she who grasped Aegon's forearm in greeting. She gazed at the silhouette of the land up ahead, breath misting in the early chill. "I see a new dawn," she said, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "The painted table in Dragonstone shows all the 7 kingdoms as if it were one land. Yet to truly weave them together, can it be done without war?" Aegon's chest swelled with hope. "We will try," he said. "I will try." They made landfall by midday, establishing a small encampment on the outskirts of a fishing village that clung to the eastern edge of what was called the Blackwater Rush. This was not the site of an invasion, no flame, no roar of war horns. Instead, Aegon sent word to the nearest lords that he, his sisters, and their knights would request an audience. The local fisherfolk, grizzled men with calloused hands and leathery skin, stared wide-eyed at the dragons and at the bright Targaryen banners rippling in the breeze. Yet those same small folk found, to their astonishment, that the dragon lords were polite, paying for goods rather than taking them, speaking kindly rather than barking orders. While Aegon's knights set up tents, Visenya strode across the camp perimeter, her presence putting the men at ease yet reminding them of her formidable skill. Rhaenys, too, pitched in, helping to organize supplies for their foray deeper into Westeros. They were not so large an army as the realm might have expected. Indeed, Aegon's approach was measured. He had with him only a small cadre of loyal bannermen from Dragonstone and a contingent of personal guards. The real power, everyone knew, was the trio of dragons dozing near the water's edge, their black or red scales glinting whenever they shifted. Within a few days, travelers and merchants came to see the fabled Targaryens for themselves. Word spread, the conquerors had come, but they did not scorch the earth. Instead, Aegon Targaryen sought parley. Rumors blossomed in every tavern, every hamlet. Some said it was a trick that, at the right moment, the dragons would lay waste. Others, more hopeful or naive, wondered if the Targaryen arrival heralded some new dawn, as Rhaenys had so poetically put it. The first local lord to arrive in camp was Lord Darklyn of Duskendale, a cautious man with thinning brown hair and wary eyes. He expected to be confronted with demands of fealty. To his shock, Aegon invited him to dine. In a grand pavilion, with flags embroidered in the three-headed dragon flying above, the Targaryen siblings welcomed Lord Darklyn with courtesy. Aegon, clad in black and red leathers, served him wine. Rhaenys chatted with him about the local farmland and harvest. Visenya sat in a corner, watchful, ensuring her brother's safety but allowing him to carry the conversation. When Aegon finally spoke of his purpose, he did so without threat. "My sisters and I have come to Westeros to unite it," he told Lord Darklyn in a calm voice. "But I will not demand your loyalty through fear alone. We have dragons, yes, but we wish to see each kingdom, each house, given its due respect. The Targaryens, though ancient, are but one family. You have your traditions, your pride, your rightful place in this realm." Lord Darklyn, entirely taken aback, glanced at each Targaryen in turn. "My lord, what is it you truly seek from me, if not my surrender?" Aegon smiled faintly. "I seek your counsel. The Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, all these kingdoms have endured violence upon violence. I would speak with their lords, and I will not force them to their knees. Rather, I propose a grand council, one in which all the great kings and high lords attend, and we discuss a union. A realm of equals, in which each region retains autonomy, but we stand together under one banner for mutual defense and prosperity." The older man sipped his wine to hide his astonishment. Never had he heard talk like this from a man with 3 dragons at his back. He could not fathom how Aegon believed such unity possible, given the centuries of feuding. Yet the seeds of curiosity were sown. If there was even a chance that the realm could be united in peace, perhaps it was worth hearing. In short order, Aegon convinced Lord Darklyn to help spread invitations. Missives would be carried forth to the Storm King, Argilac Durrandon, to Harrenhal of the Iron Islands, who now sat in the towering fortress of Harrenhal, to Loren Lannister of the Westerlands, to Mern Gardner of the Reach, to Ronal Arryn in the Vale, who still clung to boyhood behind the Aerys' towering defenses, to Torrhen Stark, the king in the north, and, of course, to Princess Maria Martell of Dorne, the fabled yellow toad of the desert sands. These letters carried Aegon's invitation to a gathering on the shores of Blackwater Bay. An open hand, rather than a drawn sword. Days stretched into weeks. The Targaryen party established itself along the Blackwater, building a more permanent camp with wide pavilions, stables, and even a rough-hewn hall that local carpenters erected from the pine forests nearby. The dragons hunted game in the surrounding countryside, sometimes glimpsed overhead, silhouettes of wonder and dread. Yet still, no armies marched in open hostility, and no farmland was burned. Skepticism permeated every corner of the 7 kingdoms. Many lords advised their kings to assemble forces and crush these Targaryens before they could spread their influence. Others counseled caution, for to risk open war with 3 dragons was madness. As the first contingents began to arrive, tension crackled in the air. Lords and knights from lesser houses approached with retinues of men-at-arms. Rather than finding an army of thousands braced for conquest, they discovered a small fortress of tents with Targaryen banners, watchfires at night, and the constant presence of monstrous dragons who lurked or curled in the sun. Those men bowed in fear or awe only to be treated courteously. They were shown a portion of what might be if they dared to gather. And so the word went out again. More arrived in trickles, then in cautious caravans, until the gathering spot near the Blackwater resembled a grand fair with pavilions and color and perhaps the greatest assembly of lords in a single place since the Dawn Age. When King Argilac the Arrogant arrived in his gilded armor at the head of a column of hardened Stormlander knights, the tension mounted. He expected betrayal even as he had refused Aegon's original overtures months prior to this camp's formation. Argilac had heard the tales of Aegon's new approach and was suspicious of a trap. As he rode past the onlookers, his unyielding expression betrayed no hint of fear, although he had privately heard the stories of how unstoppable dragons could be in battle. Beside him rode lords with stern faces who exchanged uneasy glances at the sight of Balerian's black wings in the distance. In the center of the encampment, a large circular field had been cleared, ringed with torches and raised platforms for the lords to gather. When Argilac dismounted to meet Aegon Targaryen face-to-face, he found not a suppliant nor a scheming pretender, but a man of near-kingly bearing whose quiet dignity was bolstered by the presence of his sisters. Visenya and Rhaenys flanked him, each with a regal air of her own. No words of subjugation crossed Aegon's lips. Instead, he reached out to clasp Argilac's hand if the Storm King would allow it. Argilac eyed him suspiciously, but he did not refuse. "Thank you for coming," Aegon said simply, pressing no demands. Argilac snorted. "I came because you have dragons, and only a fool ignores such power." A pause. "But I will hear your words." It was a small victory, but one that heartened Aegon. He had dreaded that Argilac might ride out to proclaim war and refuse diplomacy. That alone signaled this was a different turning of the wheel. He led Argilac and his chief bannermen into a large pavilion where food and ale awaited, making conversation easy. If Argilac was taken aback by the civility, he hid it well under a mask of gruff self-assurance. Similarly, when Harren the Black arrived in all his grim pride, a hush fell over the camp. Harren rode at the head of a contingent of Ironborn, glowering from beneath the wide black battlements of his helmet. His new castle, Harrenhal, was said to be the greatest in the land, with towers that stabbed at the sky. He was rumored to be cruel beyond measure. He came, some whispered, only to see with his own eyes the so-called Targaryen threat, to measure how best to break it. One by one, the kings or their envoys arrived. King Loren of the Rock with his short golden beard, accompanied by a train of lions upon his banners. King Mern of the Reach, green hand emblazoned on field of gold, arrived with a larger retinue than any, for he was a proud man certain of his realm's bounty and numbers. Young King Ronald of the Vale did not come himself but sent his mother, the Regent Shara Arryn, who arrived with knights in glittering silvered mail. From the north came a retinue under the banner of the Dire Wolf, men sent by Torrhen Stark, though the king in the north did not come in person at first. He too was wary. And from Dorne came only a small embassy. Princess Maria, too old and infirm to travel such a distance easily, had instead sent her favored grandniece, whose sand-yellow cloak signaled the colors of House Martell. She brought few men but arrived with the quiet pride of her people who had never bowed to any foreign invader. The tension was immense, for never had the kings and high lords of Westeros gathered in one place outside of open warfare. Yet, in the midst of it, the Targaryens did not present themselves as conquerors. They did not levy taxes, did not demand fealty, did not seat themselves upon thrones. Instead, with the help of Lord Darklyn and other houses like Rosby and Massey, lesser lords near Dragonstone, Aegon prepared a great feast beneath a warm sunset sky. Long tables were laid out on the grass. Torches flickered as the evening deepened. And there, each king or envoy took a seat at a table with Aegon and his sisters. Lords and knights, common retainers too, mingled in a swirl of heraldry and hushed conversation. Aegon rose to speak before them all, every eye fixed on him. The breeze ruffled his black tunic. The flickering torchlight caused shadows to dance across his face. Visenya and Rhaenys stood to either side. Tall, proud, silver-haired Targaryens whose faces radiated the mystery and magnetism of old Valyria. "I greet you all as guests," Aegon said, and his voice, mellow and resonant, carried across the open night air. "I know many of you expected that I would come here to conquer, as my forebears might have done. You see the dragons at my back and anticipate only war. Indeed, that was my original plan, to subdue this continent under the might of my house so we might unify it. But I have come to believe that unity enforced by fear alone is brittle. The realm I envision can only flourish if each kingdom retains its strength, its identity, and is treated as an equal partner." Some looked on in surprise or disbelief. Murmurs passed through the gathered lords. Harren the Black sneered visibly, though he said nothing yet. Argilac frowned, arms crossed over his broad chest, uncertain how to respond. Aegon continued, "I know your mistrust. You wonder if my words are but a veil for conquest. So let me speak plainly. I offer you a seat at the table in a grand realm, joined together for mutual defense, trade, and opportunity. All shall keep their crowns if they choose. All shall rule their own domains. But we will sign a pact of perpetual alliance. No more petty wars that cause small folk to starve while lords feud over borders. Instead, we stand united against outside threats, and we build roads for trade, share knowledge, guarantee the rights of travelers. Let us be 7 kingdoms, but act as one realm when the need is great. The hush deepened. Some were taken by the radical nature of the offer. Yet the suspicion in men's faces was clear. King Argilac broke the silence, leaning forward with a snarl in his tone. You speak grand words, Targaryen. But how do we know you won't burn us all the moment we sign your pact? Visenya's hand moved slightly toward her sword hilt, but Aegon gestured, keeping the peace. He replied, You do not know that. I cannot offer proof beyond my word, which I know must mean little to those who have only heard tales of dragonlords. But if I meant to rule by terror, I would not have opened these negotiations. I would not have welcomed you here in peace. Hear me now, I do not wish to be a king with subjects. I wish to be a man among equals, forging something new. Let us build a council of kings and lords to govern matters that affect us all. Fine words. This time it was Harrenhal who spoke, his voice low and deadly. But if I keep my crown, then what do you gain, Targaryen? Why would a man with 3 dragons be content to share power with the likes of us? Aegon paused. The Targaryens fled the doom of Valyria. We have seen the horrors of unstoppable power. I believe that if we do not find a way to stand together, we will only repeat the tragedies of the Freehold's end. I do not claim to be free of ambition. Yet my ambition has changed shape. I dream of forging a new order. One that might endure beyond the fragile peace of a single man's conquest. We can only achieve that by forging ties of trust and mutual respect. In that silent space, Rhaenys added, her voice gentle but clear, If we wish to build a realm that lasts, it must be built not on fear but on consent. Let each kingdom's voice be heard. It was an extraordinary proposition, and those gathered had no immediate reply. They retreated to their tents to mull it over. That night, Aegon stood at the edge of the encampment, gazing at the stars, aware that the next few days could decide the fate of his dream. Visenya joined him, her breath steaming in the cool air. She gave him a sidelong glance. They will test you, she said. They will not accept this so easily. Aegon nodded. I know, but we've come this far. She studied him a moment, then gave the barest smile. If anyone can forge a new realm, it's you. Rhaenys believes in your dream. I don't trust these lords, but I trust in your will. They stood together in companionable silence as the night settled around them. In the days that followed, small councils formed and dissolved among the assembled lords. King Mern consulted with Argilac and Loren. Harren tried to bully the lesser lords into rejecting the offer, warning that Targaryen dragons were but a means to intimidate them all into a false sense of security. Lady Shara Arryn was more reserved, meeting with Rhaenys privately to ask questions about how this proposed realm might handle conflicts or succession. The envoy from the north kept largely to themselves, their hooded cloaks thick and fur-lined against the southern climate, sending messages back to Torrhen Stark for guidance. The Dornish envoy looked on with an enigmatic smile, neither fully condemning nor endorsing the notion. Aegon and his sisters were not idle. They visited each camp in turn, working to earn trust. They listened to each kingdom's concerns. The Ironborn's thirst for raiding and plunder, the Stormlanders' pride in their ancient Durrandon line, the Gardeners of the Reach who boasted of their land's riches, the Lannisters who wanted to maintain wealth and independence. Aegon spoke passionately about unity and trade, about the possibility of connecting the continent via roads and sea routes that would benefit all. Sometimes he encountered open hostility, other times reluctant curiosity. It was not long before the great lords demanded a demonstration of good faith. They told Aegon, "Swear that you will never use your dragons against us unprovoked. Swear it publicly, upon the memory of your ancestors, and the old gods and the new, and perhaps we will take your offer more seriously." Harren was among those leading the demand, though he wore a mocking grin, perhaps hoping Aegon would refuse and reveal his true intentions. But Aegon did not refuse. In front of a crowd of onlookers, he approached Balerion, the Black Dread. The dragon's massive form towered over him, black scales absorbing the midday sun. Aegon placed a hand on the beast's neck, closing his eyes to steady himself, feeling the ancient creature's powerful heartbeat. Then he spoke in a voice that carried, "I, Aegon of House Targaryen, swear here and now that I will not unleash the fires of my dragons against any man or kingdom who does not first act in treachery or aggression against us." He spoke further oaths, calling upon the Seven, the old gods, and the memory of Valyria. While not all believed in the same deities, the gesture was potent. A hush followed. The dragon's dark eyes glimmered like coals, but the beast did not erupt in flame. Aegon stood tall. Some men felt a prickle of respect for his courage in standing so close to that monster, though skepticism still lingered. Days stretched on, and momentum gathered in favor of forging a pact. King Loren of the Rock, intrigued by the opportunity for trade with the Reach and beyond, began to entertain the idea. King Mern followed, though he was wary of losing face. Argilac remained the most belligerent, but even he saw the advantage in forging an alliance that might let him turn his attention to his old enemies in a more diplomatic setting. As time passed, a sense of cautious optimism spread through the camp. Harren the Black, however, resisted fiercely. His seat at Harrenhal was newly built and he claimed the largest castle in the realm. He had no desire to share power. He brazenly taunted Aegon in public gatherings, hinting that if the Targaryen truly wanted peace, he could bend the knee to Harren instead, or at least cede certain lands around the God's Eye. With each jibe, Harren tested Aegon's patience, apparently hoping to provoke a show of aggression. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in orange and purple, Harren confronted Aegon on the banks of the Blackwater Rush. The Targaryen siblings had just finished conferring with King Mern and Shara Aaron about a potential trade route between the Reach and the Vale when Harren, accompanied by a handful of grim-faced Ironborn, interrupted their conversation. "I tire of this charade," Harren growled, his black cloak fluttering in the wind. "If you want us to be equals, show me you have the backbone to stand up to the others. The moment you turn your back, the lions of Casterly Rock or the wolves of the north will sink their teeth into your pretty dream. You think a vow not to use dragons unless provoked will keep them at bay? You are a fool, Targaryen." Aegon held Harren's gaze, not flinching from that malevolent stare. Rhaenys and Visenya moved subtly to stand at his sides, ready should Harren's men attempt anything foolish. The crunch of gravel underfoot sounded loud in the tension. A few lesser lords and guards lingered nearby, wary. "You speak from fear," Aegon said quietly. "But I will not reply with threats. Instead, I invite you again, Harren. Sign this alliance. Stand among equals. Harrenhal is mighty, let your legacy be one of reason, not cruelty." Harren's laughter echoed off the water. "You talk of cruelty. You Targaryens come from a place that bred cruelty for centuries. I see the dragon behind your eyes, boy. Think me blind." Aegon inhaled slowly, reining in his temper. "If I wanted to prove you wrong, I could. But I see no need to stoop to violence, nor to trade insults. You have my invitation, Harren. It will remain open. If you have no further business, I ask that you allow me to conclude my talks." For a moment, Harren seemed poised to strike. His hand twitched near the pommel of his sword, and the men behind him braced. Visenya's gaze narrowed, her hand going to Dark Sister. The world seemed to hold its breath. But then Harren spat on the ground, turned on his heel, and stalked away, his men behind him. Some watchers exhaled in relief. Rhaenys, letting out a careful breath, laid a gentle hand on Aegon's arm. "He seeks to bait you, brother," she said quietly. Aegon nodded, but his eyes remained on Harren's retreating back. "He wants a war," he murmured. "He fears the realm uniting will diminish his power." In the hush that followed, Aegon saw the flickers of torches by Harren's tents in the distance, a cluster of Ironborn forging their own alliances in the dark. Despite Harren's opposition, the council pressed on. Hours of debate were spent in the makeshift hall the Targaryens had built. King Mern insisted that if there was to be a realm-wide alliance, each kingdom must have a proportionate say based on population or wealth. King Loren championed the idea of a free trade pact that would allow gold and goods to flow across the borders without hindrance. Argilac demanded recognition of his rightful domain all the way to the Kingswood, while Shara Aaron insisted that the Vale's mountainous terrain required unique provisions for defense. Aegon listened, mediated, offered compromise, and quietly used the moral and symbolic might of his dragons without ever issuing threats. They were there, impossible to ignore, a sign that if the kings could not find common ground among themselves, the Targaryens might loom as an alternative, though Aegon carefully avoided saying so aloud. Amid all this, the envoys from the north finally had word from Torrhen Stark. They brought Aegon a sealed parchment bearing the direwolf sigil. In private, Aegon opened it. The king in the north wrote simply that he would come south in person to assess this proposal. He could not believe such an arrangement might work without meeting Aegon face to face. Aegon felt a surge of hope. Convincing Torrhen Stark to set aside northern independence was no small feat. If the king in the north agreed, it would lend great legitimacy to this new order. Torrhen Stark arrived on a gray morning when frost rimed the grass in silver. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and a solemn demeanor. He rode with 100 men, each cloaked in wolf pelts. Their arrival caused a stir among the southern lords who had heard tales of the grim north. Torrhen wasted little time. He requested an immediate audience with Aegon, which was granted. In the same grand pavilion that had welcomed so many others, they met. Torrhen studied Aegon through cool gray eyes, his gaze lingering on the dragon sigils and the Valyrian steel sword by Aegon's side. "I expected to find an army," Torrhen said. "Instead, I find a negotiation." Aegon smiled faintly. "I hope you are not disappointed." Torrhen considered him for a long moment. "I have never believed that the North required the interference of southern kings. We have been our own realm for thousands of years. But the time may come when a threat beyond your knowledge arises. The White Walkers are not but children's stories, or so our legends say. Unity might serve us all in the face of the unknown. Show me the shape of this alliance you propose, and if I find it fair, the North shall stand with you. But if I find it wanting, I will return home and let the rest of you do as you will." That was more than Aegon hoped for. He offered Torrhen hospitality, and in days to come, the king in the north immersed himself in the ongoing debates. He saw the suspicion, the rivalries, the centuries of enmity that still boiled beneath the surface. Yet Torrhen also saw something remarkable. Lords and kings who had never before sat at the same table were bargaining, searching for compromise, occasionally finding it. In quieter moments, when he crossed paths with Aegon, they spoke of the North's priorities, from White Harbor to the Wall. Aegon listened intently, acknowledging that the North had unique concerns that must be addressed in any continent-spanning arrangement. Still, Harren the Black remained the largest obstacle. He withdrew from most council sessions, mocking them as pointless. At night, rumors circulated that he was plotting an attack on the Targaryen camp or forging some alliance of his own with lesser lords eager to challenge Aegon's vision. Whispers said Harren had no faith in diplomacy, only in the towering walls of Harrenhal. It was inevitable that a clash would come. On a moonless night, an alarm rose from the eastern perimeter of the encampment. Aegon and Visenya, rushing out of their tent, found men running to mount horses. Torches bobbed in the darkness. Screams cut the air. At first, it was chaos, but they soon learned that a group of unknown assailants had attacked the stables where Vhagar and Merax's, Visenya and Rhaenys' dragons slept. The dragons, roused by stealthy blades that attempted to pierce their scales, roared and lashed out in fury. Flames lit the darkness, and part of the stables erupted in an inferno. Men in ironborn garb were seen fleeing the scene. Visenya let out a cry of rage, her eyes blazing as she tore free her sword. She ran toward her dragon, Vhagar, ignoring the heat of the flames, determined to ensure her mount's safety. Vhagar, though singed about the muzzle and neck, had not been grievously wounded, but the beast was enraged, belching great gouts of flame into the sky. Rhaenys rushed to Merax's, whose wings were partially scorched. Knights rallied around them, working desperately to contain the fire, dragging buckets of water from the Blackwater rush, but the blaze spread to a nearby tent. Aegon's fury was cold and silent. He ordered the camp's defenders to capture any who might have participated in the attack. Several Ironborn were seized, some bearing House Hor's sigil. Under interrogation, they bragged that Harren had ordered them to slay the dragons and end the threat once and for all. At dawn, the camp gathered in a state of high tension. Blackened timbers smoldered in the stable ruins. Many men had died in the confusion, some from dragon fire, others from drawn swords. Word spread like wildfire through the entire assembly that Harren the Black had made a direct strike at the Targaryens. The final line had been crossed. Argilac openly denounced Harren. Shara Aaron declared him an oathbreaker. Loren Lannister and Mern Gardner recognized that if Harren would stoop to this, no alliance could be safe as long as he remained defiant. Torrhen Stark watched in grim silence, measuring how Aegon would respond. Visenya raged. Rhaenys pleaded with Aegon to do something. Even if the dragons were not gravely harmed, the attempt was an act of war. Aegon's jaw set in a hard line. His dream of a peaceful union teetered on the edge of collapse. If he did nothing, it would show weakness and invite further aggression. If he unleashed the dragons in vengeance, he might become the tyrant he had struggled not to be. He retired to a quiet spot in the charred remains, leaning against a scorched post. The air stank of smoke and scorched flesh. Rhaenys knelt beside him, tears standing in her eyes, her dragon's outraged roars echoing behind them. Visenya stood watch, protective, awaiting her brother's verdict. At last, Aegon rose, shoulders squared. He murmured to them, "I will not let this madness destroy what we've built." But Harren has made his intention clear. If he will not stand among equals, then he stands alone. His gaze traveled to where the other kings had gathered, waiting for him to speak. I must answer this treachery. He walked with measured steps to the largest open space of the camp near the council pavilion. The kings and lords assembled there, silent, expectant. Harren was absent. He had never even hidden that his men were responsible. It was clear he had fled in the night. The tension was thick enough to taste. Aegon addressed them. You have seen the lengths to which Harrenhal will go to preserve his ambition. He has drawn blood. He has broken the peace of this camp by attacking my dragons, striking down good men in the process. Let it be known that I have no wish to unleash dragonfire upon Harrenhal, nor upon any land in Westeros. But I must demand that Harren answer for this crime, here in front of you all, and make restitution. If he refuses, and if he continues to endanger our fragile peace, then it must be that the assembled kingdoms address his threat together. King Loren was first to speak. What do you propose? Aegon drew a breath. Join me in sending a formal demand for Harren to come forth and face judgment. If he refuses, if he fortifies himself behind the black walls of Harrenhal, then we, as a united realm, must take action. Many nodded in agreement. Argilac rose, looking surprisingly resolute. The Storm King will not suffer this insult to go unanswered. I stand with the Targaryen in calling Harren to account. King Mern raised a hand. Let us be clear, if Harren ignores the summons, are we to lay siege to Harrenhal? That is precisely what must happen, Shara Aaron said, surprising some with her cold fury. If we fail to act, every lord here will see that this council is without teeth, and any warlord can shatter our peace on a whim. Torrhen Stark spoke then, his voice calm but carrying a low note of warning. A siege on Harrenhal may cause heavy losses, but if we do not stand together against such aggression, there is no point in forging this alliance at all. So they resolved it. A letter was written in grand language demanding Harren the Black present himself to the council to face charges of instigating an unprovoked attack that nearly cost the lives of dragons and men alike. It was carried by a messenger under a flag of truce, traveling swiftly up the Trident to Harrenhal. Meanwhile, the assembled kings prepared for what might come next. Already, men-at-arms sharpened swords, blacksmiths hammered out new plates of armor, lords made plans to march. In the lull that followed, tension roiled. The grand vision of a peaceful pact hung on a knife's edge. Warriors from each kingdom engaged in uneasy interactions in the camp. Some Stormlanders brawled with Ironborn who had not yet departed. A few merchants tried to lighten the mood with casks of ale and wine from the arbor, but the specter of impending conflict remained. Rhaenys tried to keep hope alive, reminding Aegon that Harren might yet bend. Visenya scoffed, certain that Harren was too proud and cruel to surrender. Aegon remained composed, though an ache crept into his heart. After all these weeks of effort, to see war looming regardless struck him like a silent tragedy. When the messenger returned from Harrenhal, the man's face was pale, and he bore a single scrap of parchment with a mocking scrawl, "Come and die, Dragonlord." That was the message from Harren the Black. So be it, thought Aegon. That same day, the kings convened in the largest pavilion yet, a hall that had served as the seat of their deliberations. Aegon stood before them, unsmiling, with Visenya and Rhaenys close by. Harren the Black has chosen war, he said. Yet the vision we have forged together cannot survive if we allow him to go unchallenged. His men have shed blood. He has rebuffed all reason. I call upon you, as equals, to stand with me in arms against the tyranny of Harrenhal. He swept his gaze across them all. King Mern nodded, face set. The Reach will send knights and foot. We cannot let this be undone. Loren Lannister, no friend to the Ironborn who had often harried the coast, thumped his chest. We ride for Harrenhal as well. Argilac's eyes shone with fierce pride. The Stormlands shall remind Harren which line has survived 1,000 storms. We stand with you. Torrhen Stark, silent as stone, finally inclined his head. If the king in the north must march, he shall march. I will not see an alliance undone before it is even signed. Shara Aaron bowed her head. The Vale stands united with you. My knights will follow. This is the test of our unity. The Dornish envoy remained silent for a moment, but then softly said, Dorne shall not take part in this war. We have not suffered from Harren's cruelty, and we have no love of forging alliances and blood. We will observe your union. If you succeed in forging peace after this, perhaps Dorne will one day join it willingly. The envoy's face was unreadable, but Aegon inclined his head, understanding their caution. So the alliance, minus Dorne, was sealed in action. The greatest host Westeros had seen in generations prepared to march upon the black towers of Harrenhal. Soldiers gathered. Banners were raised. The swirl of martial excitement filled the camp, though beneath it all was the sense that this was the forging fire. If they emerged victorious as a united force, perhaps the dream of a shared realm was possible. If they faltered, if Harren broke them, it would be a new age of ironborn terror. Aegon donned his armor for the first time, black plate with accents of red, a stylized dragon's head crowning his helm. He mounted Balerion, the Black Dread, whose roar shook the earth. Visenya mounted Vagr, her bruised but furious dragon, and Rhaenys ascended upon mare axes. King Mern led the Knights of the Reach, bright and green under gold, forming ranks that shimmered like a summer field. Loren Lannister's men came in polished steel and crimson cloaks, a wave of deadly pride. Argilac's Stormlanders brought their own ferocious vigor. The knights and men-at-arms from the Vale and the Crownlands followed. The northern contingent, now led by Torrhen himself, advanced in disciplined ranks, their banners a sea of grey direwolves on white. Harren the Black saw them coming from the ramparts of his monstrous fortress. Harrenhal, newly built at massive expense, with walls said to be so thick no siege engine could breach them, rose against the horizon. It loomed over the waters of the gods' eye like a dark omen. Harren had placed archers atop the battlements and scorpions designed to fell dragons. The Ironborn were confident that no power in Westeros could take Harrenhal by storm. So began the siege of Harrenhal, though it was less a siege than a challenge. Aegon and his sisters soared overhead on their dragons, letting loose gouts of flame that scorched sections of the curtain wall. Archers loosed black-fletched arrows skyward. Scorpions raked the sky, trying in vain to catch a wing or belly. King Loren and King Mern encamped around one side, building their siege lines, while Argilac built his on another side. The Vale's knights scoured the roads to prevent supplies from reaching the fortress, while Torrhen Stark's men took up positions near the lake. The Ironborn within hunkered down, certain that the walls of Harrenhal would protect them. On the second day, Aegon flew close to the ramparts. Arrows pinged off Balerion scales or fell uselessly away. Hovering just out of range, Aegon raised his voice, amplified by the swirling wind. He bellowed, "Harren, you have one final chance to end this. Come out and submit to the council's judgment and you may live." Harren's dark figure appeared briefly on a balcony high in the fortress. "Your threats are as empty as your vow was false," he shouted. "Harrenhal is impregnable. Kill me if you can, Dragon Lord." At those words, Balerion roared, a plume of black fire streaming outward. Aegon ascended out of range of the scorpion bolts that whizzed by. He circled once, then soared away, unwilling to waste his dragon's flame on the thick outer walls. Below, siege towers crept closer, but the Ironborn poured boiling oil, repelling attempts to climb the walls. Casualties mounted on both sides. On the third night, the combined armies lit watchfires across the fields around Harrenhal. In a large command tent, the kings gathered with Aegon and his sisters to plan. Argilac barked that they should rush. The walls at dawn, but Loren and Mern argued for a more cautious approach. Torrhen observed in that measured tone of his that the fortress might withstand such an assault for months. Rhaenys stated that once the walls had time to cool, the dragons could attempt repeated blasts of flame to heat and crack the black stone. Visenya agreed. Aegon alone seemed silent, recalling his vow not to unleash the dragons in open warfare unless he faced aggression. Yet aggression had come. Harren had forced his hand. Thus, the plan was formed. At first light, the dragons would target one tower repeatedly, using their flame to heat the stone until it might crack. Meanwhile, the armies would keep the gates under pressure, preventing Harren from sallying forth. The next day, they enacted the plan. Balerion, Vagr, and Meraxes swooped in low, tongues of dragon fire licking the same tower again and again. Archers and scorpions filled the sky with iron, and while a few bolts grazed the dragons, none found a lethal mark. Over hours, the thick stone glowed red in places. A hairline crack formed. Late in the day, with a thunderous rumble, a huge section of the tower collapsed, burying countless Ironborn beneath scorching rubble. Smoke and dust billowed upward. Yet Harrenhal stood, defiant, and Harren the Black still did not yield. That night, terror gripped those within the fortress. Harren rallied them, promising that the walls would hold, that the dragons would tire or run out of fuel for flame. But fear had taken root. Desertions began under cover of darkness. Some tried to slip out of side gates or swim across the God's Eye. They were captured by the besieging forces. Each deserter told the same tale, that Heron was mad with rage, determined to fight until the last breath. On the 5th day, Aegon decided the time had come for a final ultimatum. As the armies formed ranks, as the siege towers and catapults readied, Aegon soared again on Balerion, Rhaenys on mare axes, Visenya on Vagor, black silhouettes against a gray sky. They circled once more, unleashing fire upon the walls. This time, at last, Heron himself was glimpsed on the highest parapet, hurling curses at the sky. Some said he even flung a spear at the dragons, though it fell harmlessly below. Balerion descended in a great rush of wind, the flapping of colossal wings shaking the air. In a bellowing voice, Aegon cried out, "Heron Hoare, this is your last chance to yield. Surrender, and the council shall judge you. Resist, and die." Heron's only reply was a furious scream. Aegon inclined his head to Visenya and Rhaenys, and together, the 3 dragon riders unleashed their full fury. Fire rained down upon the black walls, upon the towers, upon the parapets. The stone began to glow, cracks widening. Men's screams filled the air as they roasted alive behind the thick walls. Eventually, with a groan like the breaking of the earth, entire sections of Harrenhal collapsed, showering the grounds in fiery rubble. The black towers melted in places, the heat so intense that the gods would inside burst into flame. The riverside walls crumbled at last, exposing the courtyard in a storm of embers and dust. The besieging armies saw it happen, heard the wails from within. Many shuddered, for the power of dragons was laid bare, the unstoppable might that Heron had mocked and challenged. After the final tower collapsed, the dragons circled once more. The next day, the combined armies cautiously entered the broken fortress, picking their way through heaps of smoking stones and charred corpses. They found Heron's remains in a melted courtyard. The once mighty king had been consumed by dragonfire, surrounded by a ring of scorched ironborn who had refused to flee. So ended Heron the Black. The siege was over. No Ironborn remained to resist. The battered survivors surrendered to the allied host. Some cursed Heron's name, blaming his arrogance for their doom. Others slumped in shock. The allied kings oversaw the aftermath, ensuring that Harrenhal's garrison was disarmed, that the fires were doused as much as possible, and that the castle's fate would be decided by the new council. In the days that followed, a sober mood fell upon the allied camp. They had achieved a shared victory, but at great cost. The power of dragons had been unleashed, and Aegon's vow not to use them except in answer to aggression was tested to its limit. Soldiers whispered that they had just seen how unstoppable Targaryen fire could be. Yet in that hush, a measure of awe and perhaps respect for the alliance also took shape. Meeting with the other kings in a scorched courtyard of Harrenhal, Aegon removed his helm, letting his silver hair hang loose around his face. Smoke still curled skyward from embers in the rubble. Visenya and Rhaenys were there too, each bearing visible signs of exhaustion. The other kings, Loren, Mern, Argilac, Torrhen, and Shara for Ronal, formed a circle. "The threat is ended," Aegon said. His voice carried a tinge of sorrow. "We have proven that united, we can overcome even the mightiest fortress." He looked at each of them. "I regret that it came to such violence. Let this be the last time we must take up arms against each other. Let us return to our original vision, a realm of equals, forging peace and prosperity." King Loren exhaled. "After what I have witnessed, Targaryen, I know you speak from a place of principle. Because if you wished, you and your sisters alone could have destroyed this castle without our help. You had no need for our armies." King Mern nodded in somber agreement. "Your vow to use dragonfire only in answer to treachery stands. Heron reaped his just reward." Argilac snorted. "I do not relish being overshadowed by dragons, but it is better to stand as allies than to meet that fate." He swept a hand at the melted towers. Torrhen Stark, quiet as ever, stepped forward. "The North came to test if your alliance was genuine. I have seen it in action. I have seen your restraint, and I have seen your resolve. Perhaps the time has come for the North to join with the rest of Westeros, as improbable as that once seemed." A faint smile touched Aegon's lips. "Then let us formalize it. Each kingdom retains its ruler, its laws, its customs. But we will form a council composed of all crowns and great lords, so that no single kingdom wages war upon another. In times of crisis, we stand together. In times of peace, we stand separate yet united. They agreed. Some, like Argilac, required more detailed assurances that his line would not be overshadowed. Others wanted to finalize trade terms or set guidelines for the movement of troops across borders. But in the charred ruins of Harrenhal, a new order was truly born. The unity forged in the crucible of conflict promised a different future, one in which the Targaryens were not tyrants but first among equals, bound not by subjugation but by choice. The days turned into weeks as the battered armies dispersed. Many knights returned to their families, carrying stories of how a Targaryen with 3 dragons had offered a dream of peace, not just conquest. Lords and ladies across the land marveled at the notion of the 7 kingdoms in council. Slowly, the idea took root. In the Riverlands, long oppressed by Iron-born rule, local houses greeted Aegon as a liberator. Some even insisted he take the title of king, that he might stand as the final authority over them all. But Aegon refused to don a crown that would place him above the others. Instead, by mutual agreement, the Riverlands were granted the right to choose their own Lord Paramount, who would hold a seat on the council equal to that of the other kings. Thus, when the council reconvened on the shores of the Blackwater in a new wooden hall, each king took a seat around a circular table, signifying equality. Even Princess Maria's envoy from Dorne appeared, though they only came as observers for the time being. Torrhen Stark, Argilac Durrandon, Loren Lannister, Mern Gardner, Ronal Arryn, represented by his mother until his majority, and the newly elected Lord Tully for the Riverlands all sat with Aegon and his sisters. Together, they signed what came to be called the Pact of the Blackwater. It codified their alliance, guaranteeing mutual defense, open trade routes, and the freedom of each kingdom to govern itself. The Targaryens were named stewards of unity, recognized for their dragons but forbidden by vow to use them except to protect the pact from those who would tear it asunder. The common folk soon began calling this union Aegon's Fellowship. The name took on a mythic quality as though referencing an ancient prophecy fulfilled. Some spoke in reverence of how the Targaryens had not come as tyrants but as shepherds guiding the realm into a new era. Of course, not all was instantly solved. Tensions lingered. Old border disputes did not vanish overnight. Dorne, proud and fiercely independent, remained aloof. But now, with roads being built and trade blossoming, with the knowledge that an assembly of kings met regularly to arbitrate conflicts, Westeros saw fewer petty wars. Lords discovered it was more profitable to compete in commerce than in bloodshed. The battered Riverlands, free at last from Iron-born oppression, reclaimed their fields and rebuilt. Houses that had once been sworn enemies now found themselves exchanging letters and hosting envoys, slowly knitting the realm together. In King's Landing, once just a small fishing village where Aegon had first set foot, construction began on a grand meeting hall atop a hill so that future councils could be held in a more permanent location. Men joked that it might one day outshine even the Red Keep that never was, for in this new future, the Targaryens did not claim the Iron Throne. No single seat dominated. Instead, the place was designed with a great round council chamber. As the years unfolded, Aegon and his sisters became something akin to traveling mediators, bringing their dragons only to quell rebellions that threatened the Pact's stability. The sight of Balerion, Vhagar, or Meraxes was enough to end many a conflict without a single flame. With each passing year, more cynics came to accept that the Targaryens truly desired stability, not tyranny. Visenya, restless in peacetime, took it upon herself to establish a network of loyal knights. Some scorned this as her personal guard, but she insisted these knights were sworn to uphold the pact itself, crossing borders if needed to assist in protecting the smallfolk. Rhaenys, meanwhile, brought music and stories from one kingdom to another, encouraging the spread of culture and forging friendships among courts that had once been strangers. Aegon oversaw the building of roads patterned after the old Valyrian roads in Essos so that trade and travel would be easier. Each project symbolized another stitch in the tapestry of a united Westeros. Word reached Essos, too, of this unusual arrangement. Merchants arrived to do business, amazed to find an entire continent that, while not wholly at peace, was far more stable than any region ruled by a dozen warring factions. Gold poured into ports like Old Town and Lannisport, and caravans moved more safely north to Winterfell or east to Gull Aun. Over time, it became clear that Westeros was no longer an easy target for external threats, for to attack one kingdom was to bring the wrath of them all, and, ultimately, the wrath of the dragons. In quiet moments, Aegon would reflect on what might have been if he had chosen the path of simple conquest. He imagined burning armies, ruined cities, endless blood feuds, and a legacy of tyranny. Instead, he saw the slow blossoming of trust. Not universal, not perfect, but real. He saw the forging of roads, the laughter in the markets, the flow of ideas and goods. He saw hope. And though he sometimes felt the burden of balancing so many competing interests, he believed it was worth every ounce of effort. Some historians in later generations would call it the Pax Targaryen, a golden age that reshaped Westeros. Others would argue that the seeds of future conflicts remained, that a realm of equals was an impossible dream. Indeed, the realm would face new threats in time, ambitious lords, unforeseen catastrophes, external enemies. Yet the precedent had been set. No longer were the Seven Kingdoms a patchwork of isolation but a confederation bound by oaths freely given. And at the heart of that confederation stood Aegon Targaryen and his sisters, keepers of the dragons yet resolute in their vow not to unleash them lightly. Even after Harrenhal's ruin, few forgot the day those black stones melted like wax under the heat of Balerian's flames. It served as a grim reminder that, should any house seek to undermine the pact through blatant treachery and bloodshed, the Targaryens would not shrink from defending what they had built. Yet it also reminded the Targaryens themselves of the destruction their power could wreak if ever misused. In time, King Argilac passed his crown to a successor more inclined toward diplomacy. King Loren died peacefully, leaving behind a more prosperous Westerlands. King Mern oversaw a renaissance in the Reach, with blossoming trade fueling advances in learning and agriculture. Torrhen Stark returned north, ensuring the North's independence of culture was preserved even as they sent delegates to the Grand Council in King's Landing. Shara Aren guided her son, Ronal, into adulthood, teaching him how to navigate the complexities of shared rule. The Riverlands under House Tully never again suffered under Iron-born tyranny. Dorne watched from afar, occasionally sending observers or merchants, until at last, under a later generation, they too joined the Confederation by choice, unwilling to remain isolated forever. Through it all, Aegon remained the quiet fulcrum, his sisters his greatest allies and confidants. Rhaenys would often muse that they had done something unprecedented. Visenya, ever vigilant, would caution that they should not relax their guard. But Aegon, strolling along the docks at King's Landing or the winding roads near Winterfell, meeting with princes and peasants alike, never ceased to marvel at how differently things had turned out from his earlier dream of conquest by fire and blood. For the lords of Westeros, many found their fortunes improved in this grand experiment of unity. Some old grudges lingered, yes, but more were set aside in the face of the greater benefits of peace. The small folk who had always borne the brunt of noble wars now lived with more security than they had known. Harvests were more consistent, taxes less burdensome when every petty dispute did not erupt into raids and burning. The King's Road, as it came to be called, allowed grain from the Reach to feed the north and timber from the north to flow south. The Vale's skilled falconers and stonemasons traveled more freely, plying their crafts in Lannisport or Highgarden. And in every region, the memory of Dragonfire reminded them of the cost of unleashing war. In private, Aegon sometimes confided in his sisters about his lingering fears. The Targaryen line was not a large one. They had no uncles or cousins left to spread the burden of leadership. Would future Targaryens be as committed to the principles of unity, or would they crave the absolute power that dragons could bring? Visenya would remind him that none could say for sure what the future held, but that their present achievement might guide future generations as a shining example of what was possible. Rhaenys would insist that love and respect, once gained, could last longer than fear. Aegon would listen, nodding, hoping that they were right. So the seasons turned. Raven after raven flew from King's Landing, carrying notices of new council decrees, trade regulations, or mediations in local disputes. It was slow, messy work, full of compromise and frustration. But it was better than the alternative. The Seven Kingdoms, still each proud and distinct, were now stitched together under a pact that recognized their sovereignty and their bond. And though the Targaryens possessed the ultimate power of dragons, they wielded it with caution, mindful of the vow Aegon had given before all those kings on that day near the Blackwater. No single man could quell the storms of ambition forever. Yet in this version of Westeros, the storm had been tempered, harnessed into something constructive. The day would come, no doubt, when warlike hearts once more tested the bonds of unity, when the memory of Harrenhal's downfall began to fade. But in the era that followed Aegon's landing, men spoke of a high tide of prosperity unknown in living memory. They spoke of the forging of roads and alliances, of a realm that sought to find common ground rather than tear itself apart. They called Aegon by many names, the Dragon of Peace, the Unifier, the First Among Equals. He bore these titles with a certain humility, for he knew that but for a single choice, an idea sparked by a nagging dream, he might have been the bitter conqueror standing amidst the ruins of an entirely different realm, worshipped by some, feared by all, and loved by none. Instead, he walked among his fellow kings and queens as a friend and confidant, forging a better world than the one he had inherited. As for the realm itself, it stood as a testament that even with fire in hand, a man could choose to build rather than destroy. And in that choice lay a power greater than that of any dragon's flame, the power to shape the course of history toward hope instead of horror. Thus did Westeros in the days of Aegon Targaryen and his sisters find a new path forward, one of fragile but resolute unity and a future that glimmered with the promise of peace. In the months that followed the forging of the Pact of the Blackwater, Westeros entered a phase of spirited energy and timid optimism. An era in which roads were laid not only on the grass and dirt between distant kingdoms but also in the cautious trust between old rivals. It began with King's Landing, that small coastal settlement where Aegon Targaryen had once made landfall. Now, carpenters and stonemasons streamed into the bustling site, determined to raise a new hall worthy of the many kings who would gather there. Wagons arrived from the Westerlands, carrying timber from the forests that clung to the edges of the Sunset Sea. Barges drifted down the Blackwater rush bearing granite blocks quarried in the hills north of the Trident. Even the north sent shipments of rough-hewn lumber, protected by thick sails against southern storms. Every day, Aegon, Rhaenys, or Visenya would walk among the laborers, sometimes on foot, sometimes astride a horse, sometimes with a dragon's dark shape circling high above. Workers paused in awe when one of the Targaryens passed by, for the silver-haired siblings seemed to carry a hush of legend wherever they went. Yet the siblings came not to rule over the project but to guide it, to see that corners were not cut, that pay was fair, and that none neglected the safety of those who toiled. Rhaenys especially took an interest in the daily lives of the builders, stopping by smoky fires where peasants cooked thin stews, or kneeling to speak with a limping laborer nursing a sprained ankle. She asked about their homes, their hopes, and listened with that gentle smile that seemed to banish fear. In her free moments, she coaxed minstrels and fiddlers to play at the edges of the camp, brightening the laborers' evenings. Over time, an easy reverence for the Targaryen siblings grew among these workers who recognized that they were no tyrants building a fortress of their own vanity. They were forging a place for all the seven kingdoms, a house of council, not conquest. Even so, the haunting memory of Harrenhal's melted towers loomed, reminding everyone of the cost of defiance and the awesome power the Targaryens wielded. Soldiers who had seen the fortress collapse under dragon flames still spoke of it in hushed voices around campfires, frightening new recruits with vivid accounts of how the black stone had glowed red before caving inward with a roar. But that recollection often led to grudging respect rather than new fear, for Aegon had proven he would not strike unless pressed by wanton bloodshed. Within King's Landing, or what was slowly growing into a city worthy of that name, long piers began to jut into Blackwater Bay, offering moorage for ships from as far off as Bravos or Pentos. Curious sailors came ashore to find that the famed Targaryens permitted free trade if taxes were duly paid and that the roads leading inland were safer than they had ever been. The rumor spread across the narrow sea. Westeros was rising under a strange new compact, one that promised stability without a single tyrant enthroned. Merchants, ever drawn by the scent of gold and opportunity, arrived in droves. In council sessions within a sprawling temporary hall, still mostly wood and open to the sea breeze, Aegon and his sisters hosted lords from nearly every region. King Mern of the Reach and King Loren of the Rock were both frequent visitors, each mindful of how trade routes might bring wealth to their realms. Lord Tully of the Riverlands came, quietly proud of his new station as the chosen paramount of a region once ruled by ironborn terror. Occasionally, Shara Aaron flew falcons in the fields north of the city before stepping inside to speak on matters of commerce and safe passage for Vale caravans. Argilac Durandon still resented certain aspects of the arrangement. No oath had ever forced him to treat the Targaryens as superiors, and at times his pride flared. But the Storm King had given his word, and Argilac's word was iron. He attended the councils whenever pressed by necessity, though he typically arrived with blunt demands: recognition of certain borderlands, respect for Stormlander shipping along the Narrow Sea, and so on. Aegon handled him with unruffled calm, letting Argilac's temper blow through the hall like a summer gale, after which reason often prevailed. Dorne, ever elusive, still remained outside this confederation. Rhaenys had corresponded politely with Princess Maria Martell, sending letters that described how the new alliance functioned, how each kingdom retained its customs, how the council merely arbitrated conflicts. She assured the Dornish that no forced subjugation would come, no threat by dragonfire. For her part, Princess Maria replied with careful courtesy but rarely any firm commitment. More than once, she politely refused invitations to King's Landing, citing her age and the scorching desert climate that was ill-suited for long travel. She could not be pressed, and so Dorne stayed aloof. Yet even with that gap, the pact was tangible in the commerce that soon enlivened the continent. For the first time in generations, a wagon loaded with golden grains from Highgarden might cross the Crownlands and continue north to Winterfell without facing a single toll or border skirmish. To ensure that bandits did not prey upon these new routes, the Targaryens urged each kingdom to fortify watchtowers and send patrols. The Vale's knights were particularly adept at riding far-flung roads, while the North contributed hardy foot soldiers to keep watch in more remote areas. Every complaint of local banditry was taken seriously by the council, forcing lords to act, lest a wave of condemnation from the other kingdoms paint them as neglectful. Aegon watched it all unfold with subdued pride. There were difficulties every day: arguments over fees for mooring ships, disputes over which roads should be built first, old feuds that still flared into brawls when two houses' men met after too much ale. But the difference now was that no single quarrel would erupt into a pitched war without drawing the ire of an entire realm. The pact stood like a shield, a promise that aggression would be answered collectively. That truth was tested sooner than many expected. In the stony hills of the Westerlands, a minor lord named Daemon Bainfort began feuding with Lord Farman of Fair Isle over fishing rights and a contested coastline. What began as a series of mutual insults turned into violence. Bainfort's men attacked a Farman fishing village, burning boats and slaughtering peasants. Lord Farman's revenge came swift and brutal, culminating in bloodshed that threatened to spill across neighboring lands. News of the conflict reached King Loren Lannister, but before he could muster an army, worried ravens from the area flew to King's Landing, beseeching the new council for aid. Aegon, reading the dispatches, felt his stomach tighten. This was precisely the kind of petty warfare he and his sisters had hoped to prevent. In a swift gathering of the council, Loren Lannister expressed outrage that his vassals were so brazenly disobedient to the realm's peace. Eager to prove that the pact could quell such trouble, he requested help from the Targaryens in subduing the feuding lords. Argilac folded his arms, remarking that the Stormlands had no stake in that quarrel. But King Mern and Shara Aaron both pressed Argilac to see that the matter concerned them all, that if lords in the Westerlands could wage war without consequence, it would set a ruinous precedent. Torrhen Stark, who had come south to attend the council, declared with quiet firmness that if they did nothing, the entire confederation would be mocked and tested again. In the end, Aegon and his sisters pledged to fly west with a small retinue. King Loren would ride ahead with his own forces to handle the matter, but the presence of dragons would ensure a swift end to hostilities. Thus it was that, after months of relative calm, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes soared once more across the skies of Westeros, this time not to burn fortresses but to enforce peace. Their shadows fell upon the golden hills and rocky crags near Bainfort, sending watchers into panic. As soon as the dragons landed in a wide clearing, King Loren approached on horseback, his face drawn with the gravity of the situation. Bainfort and Farman men hovered nearby, each group suspicious of the other, weapons close at hand. The evidence of their recent feud lay in the smoldering remains of a fishing hamlet along the coast, where gulls wheeled above half-charred buildings. Visenya dismounted from Vhagar first. She said nothing, simply letting her keen gray eyes settle on the assembled men. The hush that followed was electric. Rhaenys joined her, then Aegon. King Loren introduced them with stiff courtesy, and the lesser lords found themselves confronted not by a conqueror demanding subjugation, but by the calm, implacable presence of House Targaryen. Aegon's voice carried across the camp. Lord Bainfort, Lord Farman, you have violated the spirit of the pact by engaging in bloodshed without redress. You have slain men and small folk without seeking mediation. Your actions threaten the stability we have all labored to build. We come not as judges eager to punish, but as guardians of the peace. You will answer for these deaths, make restitution, and bind yourselves by vow not to raise arms against one another again without exhausting every path of arbitration offered by the council. Lord Bayfort, a short, barrel-chested man with a nose that had clearly been broken more than once, set his jaw in stubborn defiance. I needed no one's permission to defend my lands, he spat. Farman's men robbed my fishers, burned my traps. Farman, tall and lanky, barked in return, you lie. It was your men who started it, and I have corpses to prove it. Tempers flared. Soldiers on both sides bristled, hands inching toward steel. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if violence might break out again. But then Balerion, behind Aegon, emitted a low, rumbling growl that caused the rocks underfoot to tremble. In that moment, both lords went pale. The fury that had driven them to shed blood gave way to the cold realization that they stood before a force of nature. King Loren kept his gaze firm, a lifetime of rule granting him authority. I will not allow you to disgrace the Westerlands by ignoring the pact we have forged. Both of you will subject yourselves to the council's judgment or face me as your king and face House Targaryen as well. Thus cornered, both lords submitted. Over 2 tense days, Aegon, Loren, and the Targaryen sisters heard each side's grievances, examined evidence of stolen nets and damaged farmland, interviewed villagers who had fled the violence. Rhaenys, with her gentle manner, coaxed fishermen to speak truthfully. Visenya stood like a silent sentinel, watching for any sign of deceit or intimidation. Aegon asked measured questions, ensuring fairness. In the end, they decreed that both Bayfort and Farman must pay reparations to each other's small folk, release all captives unharmed, and remain under watch for 2 years, during which any further aggression would bring immediate condemnation from the entire confederation. The presence of dragons made the sentence final. Neither lord dared flout the ruling, especially under King Loren's stern eye. When the Targaryens departed, flanked by a small honor guard and followed by Loren's columns of knights, the hills of the Westerlands felt quieter, subdued. In the rubble of that ruined hamlet, small folk began to rebuild, buoyed by the knowledge that no immediate war would follow. Some of them even glimpsed the swirl of black and red scales overhead and felt, if not hope, then a measure of grim security. The Targaryens were no bedtime stories. They were real, and they defended this fragile new order. Word spread quickly that the Targaryens had intervened to stop a local conflict. Cynics whispered that Aegon was playing the king without bearing the title, that the notion of a realm of equals was but a farce so long as dragons existed. Yet for every suspicious murmur there was a voice of relief, praising the swift end to bloodshed. The question lingered. Could a land so accustomed to violence truly adapt to a system in which iron swords were replaced by negotiation? Many believed in the Targaryen sincerity, though few were naive enough to assume every old grudge would vanish. Back in King's Landing, the new hall neared completion. Craftsmen from the Reach adorned the columns with carved vines and flowers, while stonemasons from the north fitted cunningly wrought stone seats around a circular table. At last, on a day of clear skies and mild breezes, the building was ready to be dedicated. Banners rippled above the roof, one for each kingdom in the Confederation, plus a 7th banner bearing the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Symbolic, some said, that Aegon had raised himself to the same rank as the others, while others insisted it merely honored the Dragon of Peace, as the small folk had begun to call him. The dedication ceremony drew a crowd. Shara Aaron arrived with her son, Ronald, who was edging into his teenage years, gawky but bright-eyed. King Loren brought some of his famed knights. From the Reach came Mern Gardner with an entourage of lords eager to see the growing capital. Argilac, surly as ever, made a curt appearance, grumbling about southern folly but curious all the same. Torrance Stark had remained in the north that season, tending to northern matters, but he dispatched his half-brother Brandon to represent House Stark in the ceremony. And so they gathered, a mosaic of houses, each wearing its own heraldry. All eyes turned to Aegon Targaryen as he stood at the threshold of the new hall, the sea breeze ruffling his silver-blonde hair. Visenya and Rhaenys flanked him, each in finely crafted garb of black and red. The doors behind them were carved with the sigils of the 6 founding kingdoms: Stark Dire Wolf, Arryn Falcon, Lannister Lion, Gardner Rose, Durrandon Crown Stag, and Tully Trout. The 7th carving was the 3-headed dragon, placed in no position of superiority but rather woven into a ring of equals. Aegon lifted a hand, calling for silence. The crowd settled instantly, enchanted by the moment. His voice, carrying in the open air, sounded both humble and proud. When my sisters and I first came from Dragonstone, we thought only of uniting Westeros by force. We believed we could bring peace at the edge of a sword. But swords alone break as easily as they kill. A unity forged by fear rots from within. We stand here today because the kings and lords of Westeros chose a different path. Here, in this hall, each kingdom holds a seat at a round table, each voice carrying the same weight. This building is not my castle, nor any one king's seat. It is ours to share. He turned, pushing open the tall doors, revealing a spacious chamber lit by high windows. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating the polished stone floor and the seats arranged in a circle around a broad table. A hush of awe rippled through the gathering as they entered, witnessing the center of what might become the new realm's governance. Shara Aaron stepped forward, her regal bearing unshaken by the years she had served as regent. "May this hall stand for many generations," she said softly, "so that our children's children can say we laid aside old hatreds to build something better." Some watchers exchanged doubtful glances, but the words felt significant nonetheless. With that, the Hall of Concord, so Rhaenys had named it, was officially inaugurated. The onlookers explored its columns, admired its carvings, took their places around the table. A new seat was readied for Lord Tully, who would speak for the Riverlands. King Loren studied the space, nodding in approval. Mern traced a finger over the rose motif that wrapped around the base of his seat, remarking that the craftsmanship rivaled anything in Highgarden. Argilac muttered about the extravagance but settled on the stag-emblazoned chair nonetheless. The opening council meeting in the new hall commenced with a sense of ceremony. The walls echoed with the clank of armor, the rustle of cloaks, and the low murmurs of watchers in the gallery. Aegon did not sit in a higher seat than the others but took one among them, a clear statement that he was first among equals only by the goodwill of the others. Rhaenys and Visenya watched from seats at his flank, though they retained a special air. They were not kings or queens of separate kingdoms. They were Targaryens, guardians of the pact. Discussion quickly turned to the practical matters of the realm. King Mern proposed a major expansion of roads linking Highgarden to Lannisport and from there branching south toward Old Town. Argilac grumped that the Crownlands needed more patrols to keep the highways safe, claiming that thieves still haunted the Kingswood. Brandon Stark spoke on behalf of his brother, pledging assistance if ever the roads to White Harbor needed reinforcing. Shara Aaron raised the question of bridging certain rivers for easier passage, sparking debate over engineering and cost. Aegon watched it all with the faint curve of a smile. Here were once enemies, old families that had warred for generations, now deliberating side by side as though it were natural. Yes, tensions rose at points. King Mern bristled at Loren's attempts to direct traffic toward the gold-laden Westerlands. Argilac fumed when reminded that the Stormlands would be expected to share the cost of certain infrastructure. But no swords were drawn. No threats of annihilation were made. The memory of Harrenhal and the watchful presence of dragons ensured that civilized discourse prevailed. In the following months, the Hall of Concord earned its keep. Messengers in each kingdom carried news to and from King's Landing, updating the council on local issues. Representatives from various houses traveled the roads more freely, discovering a new class of taverns and inns springing up to cater to the increased movement of travelers. Gold from trade poured into once quiet hamlets. Merchants from across the narrow sea found the region more open, less hazardous. The Confederation's coffers, such as they were, filled enough to fund basic projects, though every coin spent required a majority vote among the members. It was a delicate balance. The Targaryens could have imposed taxes by dragon-backed force, but that would have violated the principle that each kingdom governed itself. Instead, the kings themselves decided on contributions for realm-wide improvements, each measuring how much they could afford against the risk of falling behind in collective influence. Despite disputes and occasional rancor, progress inched forward. All the while, Dorne stayed aloof. Travelers going south reported that Princess Maria Martell was still very much alive despite her advanced age, holding firm to the Dornish way of independence. While Dornish merchants did begin to ply the roads that connected Storm's End to King's Landing, no official envoy from Sunspear ever arrived to take a seat in the hall. Rhaenys wrote letters urging them to come observe the benefits of the pact, but their replies remained polite and noncommittal. One day, a Dornish caravan arrived bearing a small casket of rare spices and perfume, a gift from House Martell to House Targaryen, a gesture of respect, perhaps, or at least a desire for cordial relations. The note enclosed was brief: "We see the realm you build. May it flourish in your time. Dorne stands as it ever has, unbowed, unbent, unbroken." Aegon read it with a wry tilt to his lips, well aware that Dorne's independence was a point of pride that might outlast his entire lifetime. As the Confederation stabilized, a subtler concern grew among those who observed the Targaryens closely. For all the talk of equality, it was obvious that the dragons were the final power ensuring the peace. What if the Targaryens grew old or died? Or if a future generation proved less principled than Aegon and his sisters? Some lords whispered that the entire arrangement could crumble if another Harren the Black arose, or if a Targaryen took it upon themselves to conquer everything after all. In his private chambers, Aegon wrestled with these thoughts. He confided in Visenya and Rhaenys late at night, the three siblings sometimes meeting by candlelight. Visenya urged him to establish clearer rules for the use of dragons, something akin to a written vow that they could not be used except by unanimous council decree. Rhaenys, kinder of heart, suggested that the realm's prosperity might itself ensure that future Targaryens had no reason to become tyrants. But Aegon was not wholly satisfied. He saw how a single generation's virtues could vanish in the next. It weighed heavily on him, especially as letters arrived from the distant east. Old Valyria was gone, consumed in doom and ash, but other powers in Essos still stirred. Volantis had begun an expansionist phase, and rumors claimed they eyed the western sea routes with fresh interest. Braavos remained a free city of cunning bankers and fearsome fleets. If Essosi powers grew ambitious enough, Westeros might face threats from beyond the narrow sea. A realm of equals needed a strong unified defense, but it also required careful checks so that no single faction, nor the Targaryens themselves, could abuse that power. Meanwhile, the passing months brought changes in the personal lives of kings and lords. Shara Aaron's son, Ronal, entered manhood, taking on more responsibilities in the Vale. Argilac Durrandon grew older, his famous head of thick hair now streaked gray. King Loren began to speak of a potential betrothal for one of his nephews to a daughter of King Mern, ensuring closer ties between the Rock and the Reach. Torrhen Stark, busy in the north, governed with a steady hand, though from time to time he sent envoys to King's Landing to keep abreast of developments. And the Targaryens themselves, three siblings with no other living kin, began to think of heirs. Visenya, ever pragmatic, stated that to secure House Targaryen's future, one or more of them needed to marry and produce children. Rhaenys teased that perhaps all three should do so, though Valyrian tradition about siblings marrying siblings was not unknown. Yet that very tradition troubled Aegon, who had spent most of his life hearing the murmurs of Westerosi disapproval towards such unions. If the Targaryens were truly forging a new path, could they not set aside old Valyrian customs? The question hovered unspoken for a time, and each sibling seemed uncertain how best to proceed. There was talk of forging alliances via marriage to one of the other royal houses. Some lords even wrote discreet letters offering a daughter or sister to the Targaryens in hopes of tying dragons to their lineage. But Aegon was cautious. He refused to treat marriage as a mere political bargain, not wanting to sow jealousy among the newly united kings. Visenya, who had always been close to Aegon, said little on the matter, but Rhaenys sensed that her elder sister was more attached to Aegon than she let on. In the Hall of Concord, a new challenge soon arose that tested the realm's unity. From across the sea, a fleet of pirates began harrying the western coasts, striking at the Shield Islands near the Mander's Mouth and carrying off captives to be sold in Myr or Lys. King Mern was furious, as were the lords of the Reach whose shores were attacked. They demanded immediate action from the Confederation, citing the Mutual Defense Clause. King Loren, too, saw a threat to his western ports. Argilac, while not directly affected, acknowledged that if they let pirates roam freely, it would embolden others. Thus, the council voted to muster a joint fleet. The Reach contributed a number of cogs and war galleys. The Westerlands supplied swift longships. Storm's End, situated on the narrow sea, offered some smaller vessels but also pledged to assist financially in outfitting the expedition. Even the Vale sent a few galleys around Dorne's southern coast, an arduous journey but one they undertook to show solidarity. The Riverlands, less seafaring by nature, promised men to serve aboard the Allied ships. Coordinating this was no small feat. The project required a central command, which in turn raised the question of who would lead. Some proposed that Aegon himself oversee the fleet, for the Targaryens stood above petty squabbles. Others said the admirals of the Reach or the Westerlands had more experience. Arguments flared in the Hall of Concord. Each kingdom worried about its pride, each reluctant to yield. Aegon, reluctant to hoard authority, suggested that an admiral from the Westerlands and one from the Reach share command, with the Targaryens sending an observer to maintain neutrality. At last, the allied fleet gathered at the mouth of the Mander, its sails a patchwork of green hands, golden lions, crowned stags, falcons, trouts, and even the dire wolf sigil on a few borrowed ships. Rhaenys flew overhead on mare axes, scanning the horizon for any sign of the pirate vessels. The rumor was these raiders had established a base somewhere along the rocky islands west of the Arbor, a hidden cove from which they launched swift strikes. The allied fleet set forth, timbers creaking, oars surging in unison, sails billowing in the salt breeze. In the days that followed, the search for the pirate lair tested the new alliance at sea. Different captains bickered over navigation and strategy. More than once, the fleet risked losing cohesion as storms battered them. But a spirit of camaraderie gradually took hold, each realizing that if they failed, it would be a blow to every kingdom's security. When at last they found the pirates, a fierce sea battle erupted among jagged reefs and hidden shoals. The allied fleet nearly ran aground in the tumult. Pirates who were adept at these waters fought savagely, boarding some allied ships and leaving them aflame. Cries rang out across the waves. Yet the presence of Rhaenys on Meraxes struck terror into the raiders. She did not unleash indiscriminate dragon fire for fear of harming friendly ships, but her mere silhouette above the clouds made the pirates hesitate. With that advantage, the allied fleet pressed hard, ramming pirate galleys, cutting down foes in bloody deck-to-deck combat. In a final, desperate move, some pirates tried to flee, slipping around a rocky point to reach open water. Rhaenys, seeing the breakaway, guided Meraxes in a sweeping dive. She unleashed one furious blast of flame across the sea's surface, not enough to incinerate the ships entirely, but enough to engulf their sails and rigging, forcing them to heel over. The pirates, shrieking, leapt into the churning water. Allied vessels closed in, capturing survivors. In the aftermath, the cove that had served as the pirates' base was torched, their loot seized, and the freed captives rescued. On a shining morning under gull-filled skies, the allied captains cheered one another, praising the joint victory. Men from the Westerlands slapped the backs of men from the Reach, each newly aware of how vital the other's help had been. It was for many the first time they had fought side by side as equals rather than across the battlefield. Rhaenys herself soared back to King's Landing with a sense of triumph tempered by sorrow for those who had died. There had been allied casualties, some ships sunk, some knights or sailors lost to the deep. But the raid had proven the Confederation's capacity to act in unison on the seas, the dragons providing the final edge. Upon her return, a crowd gathered on the beaches near the city to greet her. She dismounted from mare axes, wind-blown and exhausted, but bright-eyed. Aegon came forward, embracing her. Visenya stood nearby, arms folded, nodding once in approval. News of the victory spread swiftly. Even the Stormlands, not heavily involved, acknowledged the success. Ravaged coastal villages in the Reach and Westerlands began to rebuild with fresh hope. Some even sent tokens of gratitude to King's Landing, forging new ties with the Targaryens. Not everything was so easily mended, however. A slow tension brewed in the Riverlands, where some lesser lords begrudged the Tully ascendancy. House Frey, for instance, controlled the strategic crossing of the Green Fork. They had grown wealthy extracting tolls from travelers. Now, with the new roads and Confederation policies limiting local tolls, the Freys felt aggrieved, complaining that their family's livelihood was under threat. Lord Tully insisted that the Freys comply with the pact, but the Freys grumbled and muttered, raising the specter of defiance. Aegon knew such rumblings would persist, here and there, as old powers found themselves constrained by the Confederation's rules. He did not fear a new Heron the Black arising in every corner, but he recognized the need for careful vigilance. He consulted often with Torrhen Stark, who had come south once more, finding in the king in the north a sober mind that understood the need for balance between local autonomy and realm-wide order. If the Freys rebel, Torrhen noted in a measured tone, the entire trade route between the north and the southern kingdoms could be disrupted. We cannot allow that. Aegon nodded over the map they studied by candlelight, his brow furrowed. Yet we cannot dash to every small revolt with dragons. That would make the Targaryens tyrants and undermine the notion of each kingdom policing its own. Torrhen folded his arms. Then we push Lord Tully to handle it with the understanding that if he fails, the rest will step in. A single house shall not defy the Confederation. And so it went, measured steps, careful compromise, the forging of roads in every sense. The months slipped into years. King's Landing continued to grow, huts turning into brick and timber dwellings, small markets sprouting near the docks. The Hall of Concord remained at the heart of it all. Council sessions waxed and waned in intensity, some focusing on mundane trade policies, others on more dramatic crises. Through it all, the Targaryens presided with a firm but restrained hand. Ronald Arryn grew into a gallant young king, shy at first, then blossoming under the influence of capable knights. He took his seat in the hall with pride, speaking out on matters that concerned the Vale. Argilac, older and a bit subdued, still hammered home the Stormland's demands whenever he felt overshadowed. Myrn of the Reach proved adept at forging alliances through weddings and feasts, ensuring that half the realm seemed eager to taste Highgarden's bounty. Loren Lannister, calculating as ever, invested heavily in the expansion of Lannisport, capitalizing on open trade. Torrhen Stark, traveling south intermittently, secured roads that let the north benefit from southern harvests. Even the Iron Islands, left adrift after Harren's downfall, found themselves governed by local lords who each pledged fealty to the Confederation in exchange for being recognized as rightful rulers of their own isles, thus ensuring no single Iron-born overlord could recreate the horrors of the Horse. Yet in the swirl of political developments, the personal fate of the Targaryens remained an undercurrent. Courtiers gossiped about who Aegon might wed or whether Visenya or Rhaenys would take husbands. Some said Aegon and Visenya were too close, too accustomed to the old Valyrian ways, and that soon an incestuous marriage would be announced. Others claimed Rhaenys had a secret Dornish lover which explained her many letters south. The Targaryens themselves brushed off such speculation. They had devoted themselves so fully to forging the realm that, for a while, personal entanglements remained secondary. It was after a particularly fractious council meeting, one in which Argilac fumed over the distribution of funds for a new causeway through the Kingswood, that Aegon found himself alone in the Hall of Concord. Torches flickered against the stone columns, casting shifting shadows. He stood at the center of the circular table, gazing at the array of carved seats. For each kingdom there was a symbol. For House Targaryen, the three-headed dragon. He traced a finger over that carving, feeling every ridge of the painted wood. Footsteps sounded behind him. He turned to see Visenya, cool and composed as ever, though her eyes held a softer glint when they rested on him. "You're still here," she said quietly. Aegon nodded. "I was thinking of all that's been accomplished, and all that still could go wrong. Sometimes, sister, I wonder if one day people will look at this hall and see it as folly." Visenya moved closer, her raven feather cloak rustling. "The realm stands more united than ever before. You took a dream of blood and fire and turned it into something else. Not folly." He managed a faint smile. "And yet it all hinges on trust, on decency, on men choosing not to let old hatreds burn everything to ash." Her gaze flickered around the empty seats. "Then we must keep watch, always, ourselves and those who come after, which is why we should speak of an heir." Aegon stiffened slightly. This was not the first time she had pressed the subject. Still, it set his mind churning. "Yes," he murmured, "though I've not decided how that should be arranged. One possibility is a political match with House Stark, House Lannister, or—" Visenya cut him off a bit sharply. "You know our line is narrow. We are Targaryens, keepers of the last dragons. If we scatter our blood among many houses, we risk losing that which binds us to this realm. We risk diminishing the power of dragons, the very thing that keeps these kingdoms from snapping back into war." He studied her face, seeing the intensity that always lurked under her calm exterior. "There is Rhaenys to consider as well," he said. "We are three. We could marry out forging alliances. But if we do—" Visenya laid a hand on his. Her touch was firm and cold from the evening chill. "We are not Westerosi lords. We are Valyrian. Our ways need not vanish, Aegon. We could wed you and I. It would not be unnatural for our blood. Rhaenys might make her own choice, or one day a child of ours might wed a child of hers, ensuring the bloodline remains strong." He did not recoil. He had known for years that Visenya would speak these words eventually, for she wore her heritage like armor. Yet he felt the weight of everything they had built. What message would that send to the rest of Westeros who hold incest in horror, he asked. Visenya's chin lifted. "They have accepted dragons. They have accepted a new order. They can accept our marriage too, if it spares them from war and keeps the realm stable." Silence draped over them. Torches crackled. At length, Aegon let out a low breath, pressing his hand against the carving of the dragon. "You've never asked for anything lightly," he said quietly. "Let me think." Visenya nodded, stepping back to give him space. She did not plead or cajole. They were Targaryens, proud and pragmatic. There was no question that they were closer than many siblings. They had risked their lives together, forging this new path. In old Valyria, such a marriage would have been unremarkable. Here, in Westeros, it might plant seeds of mistrust. But perhaps less mistrust, in the end, than if Aegon wedded one kingdom's princess and spurned the others. Aegon did not make up his mind that night. He left the hall, returning to his chambers. Rhaenys was awake, reading by a low lamp, and she greeted him with an inquisitive smile that quickly faded when she saw his troubled expression. Though he said little, Rhaenys knew her brother well enough to guess the nature of his thoughts. She did not press, but she took his hand in hers, letting him sit beside her as the lamp sputtered. Sometimes a quiet presence was the only solace possible in the swirl of duty. Meanwhile, dawn was breaking on a new set of challenges. The next morning, a raven arrived bearing a message from the citadel in Old Town. An outbreak of the bloody flux threatened to spread across the region around the Honeywine. The maesters warned that if it was not contained, it might travel the newly built roads and become a realm-wide plague. Alarmed, Aegon summoned the council. King Mern, as the Reach's ruler, hurried to Old Town himself, organizing quarantines and urging the archmasters to find the best remedies. This outbreak tested the Confederation in yet another way. Trade and travel had brought prosperity, but also the risk of disease crossing borders. With the flux ravaging some smaller villages near Old Town, folk were afraid. Rumors and panic spread. Some demanded that the roads be blocked or that travelers from the Reach be turned away. But the council recognized that isolating one region entirely might devastate farmland and lead to starvation in the cities that relied on grain shipments. After lengthy debate, they settled on a plan coordinated by the Citadel. They would establish quarantines, place well-supplied way stations to test travelers for signs of the flux, and designate certain routes for essential goods. Maesters from every kingdom volunteered to help in the afflicted areas. The Targaryens contributed gold from the Confederation's coffers, along with logistic support. Argilac Durandon grumbled at the expense, but the rest of the council overrode him. Rhaenys, anxious for the welfare of the small folk, flew Meraxes to Old Town with a team of maesters, delivering supplies and potions more swiftly than any wagon. When she arrived, the sight was grim. The city gates restricted entry, and the once busy wharves were quiet in fear of contagion. Within the winding streets, families huddled behind shuttered doors. Beggars coughed in alleyways. The maesters, clad in thick gloves and face wrappings, hurried to treat whomever they could. Rhaenys found herself deeply moved by their plight, assisting however possible, even just by lifting crates of medicinal herbs or delivering urgent messages to the city watch. Her presence stirred mixed reactions, awe at the dragon and gratitude for the supplies, but also fear that the Targaryens might spread the disease further if they traveled unawares. Rhaenys assured them that the council had quarantines in place and that she would observe them as well. Over the next few weeks, the efforts paid off. While the bloody flux claimed many lives, it did not become the apocalyptic plague some had feared. The swift, collective response of the Confederation helped contain it. This crisis too passed, leaving behind sorrow for the dead but relief for the living, and a renewed sense that the pact was not simply about preventing war. It was about standing together, sharing burdens, ensuring that no single tragedy could overwhelm one kingdom without aid from the others. In Old Town, the High Septon, who had once been skeptical of Targaryen intentions, publicly thanked Rhaenys and the Confederation for their swift action. It was a gesture of friendship from the faith of the Seven, further legitimizing Aegon's dream in the eyes of many devout Southerners. With the plague ended, the roads reopened fully, and trade resumed. The realm seemed to breathe again, like a patient recovering from a sickness. Caravans stretched across the highways, ships glided along rivers, and new markets blossomed in crossroads towns. Aegon watched the transformations from King's Landing, approving grants for more watchtowers, encouraging local lords to build inns. Rhaenys was praised for her compassion, while Visenya, quietly proud, observed that the realm's resilience had grown. All these accomplishments, however, did not silence the question of the Targaryens' future. The year's end brought rumors that King Loren Lannister was pressing for a marriage alliance between Aegon and Loren's daughter, a golden-haired princess known for her wit. Similarly, King Mern suggested one of his nieces might be a suitable queen for the Targaryen. Argilac, proud as always, hinted that a Stormlander bride would be the finest for forging a link between the Crownlands and the Stormlands. Even the Vale politely proposed a match with Rhaenyra Aeron's younger sister when she came of age, though that might be years away. Aegon could not please them all. Accepting one match could offend the others, fueling envy or doubt. Meanwhile, Visenya offered a simpler path: preserve Valyrian purity, marry within the family. The turning point arrived when Torrhen Stark journeyed south again that spring, bringing a small retinue that included his daughter, a maiden of about 16 named Lyanna. She was a reserved girl with gray eyes and dark auburn hair, wearing furs even in the warmer southern weather. Some whispered that Torrhen meant to present her as a prospective bride for Aegon. But once the Starks arrived in King's Landing, it became clear that Torrhen's purpose was not so direct. He came to the Hall of Conqueror and requested a private audience with Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. There, in a small antechamber hung with banners, Torrhen folded his hands in a dignified stance. I bring my daughter to show that the North stands with you. Yet I know you face a dilemma. Many kings press for a marriage alliance. But a realm of equals cannot revolve around a single union lest we foster jealousy. Rhaenys regarded him thoughtfully. You advise that Aegon not wed any single house's daughter? Torrhen shrugged. I am no green boy enthralled by romance. I see the predicament. If you choose the Lannisters, the Gardeners take offense. If you choose the Stormlands, the Vale wonders why you slighted them. Even the North might feel overshadowed. So I suggest another approach: remain unattached. Let no single kingdom claim the Targaryen line as its own. Visenya's eyes flicked to Aegon. But the Targaryen line must continue. Torrhen acknowledged that with a grave nod. I know, but you have the Valyrian tradition of siblings marrying. It may disturb some of my own lords, perhaps many in the south as well, but it could be less destabilizing than forging an exclusive match. There would be no reason for jealousy if House Targaryen stood apart, maintaining neutrality. Aegon felt a tension coil in his chest. Is that truly your advice, Torrhen Stark? That we wed brother to sister? Torrhen did not flinch. What do I know of Valyrian custom? I only know that you stand at a fork in the road. Any other marriage might be a blow to the Confederation's unity, opening the door to old resentments. If you do not wed at all, the realm might question the stability of the Targaryen line, especially given how crucial dragons are to the pack's balance. He paused, eyes flicking to Visenya and Rhaenys. In truth, the final choice is yours. I advise only that any other path invites strife. Quiet blanketed the room. Rhaenys, perched on the arm of a wooden chair, gazed at Aegon. He could almost hear her unspoken thoughts. If a king in the north, steeped in old Westerosi ways, could counsel them to embrace Valyrian incest, perhaps the political reality truly demanded it. Visenya watched Aegon intently, her posture reserved. She had always been more warrior than courtier, but on this matter she had shown her sense of tradition. Aegon felt the swirl of conflicting emotions. A certain closeness to Visenya that had always flickered at the edges of his mind, and a more conventional sense of Westerosi taboo. He wondered how the realm would truly react, how the faith of the Seven might condemn or accept it. At last, he let out a slow breath. I appreciate your counsel, Torrhen. I must think carefully and speak with my sisters. But perhaps your perspective clarifies matters I have tried to avoid. Torrhen inclined his head. I have said my piece. I will remain in King's Landing a while, should you need me. My daughter is no more than a symbol of the North's goodwill. With that, the king in the north departed, leaving the Targaryens in pensive silence. When they were alone, Rhaenys looked between Aegon and Visenya. Well, he has put it plainly, hasn't he? Visenya gave the faintest nod, though her gaze locked on Aegon as if awaiting his decision. Aegon crossed to a window that overlooked the bay. Fishing boats dotted the water, gulls circling overhead. King's Landing had grown from a scattering of huts to a bustling port. The Hall of Concord rose behind him. His entire dream for Westeros hinged on stability and, perhaps ironically, on the neutrality of House Targaryen's blood. He turned back to his sisters. I have spent years forging this realm with you both, sacrificing whatever illusions we once had about conquest for the sake of peace. I cannot let that work unravel because lords squabble over who I marry. Nor can I ignore the need for an heir to ensure the dragons remain guardians of the pact. His gaze drifted to Visenya. She seemed to sense his resolve. A flicker of relief, perhaps even triumph, crossed her face. "So you will?" she asked softly. Aegon nodded once, though his expression was complex. "I will, yes, provided Rhaenys accepts this path. I would not have the three of us fractured. Our unity is paramount." Rhaenys swallowed. She looked down at her hands. Valyrian custom is older than Old Town's scruples. But I won't lie and say it doesn't feel strange after these years in Westeros. Still, if it must be done to keep the peace, I will stand by your choice. Visenya approached Aegon, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "We do this not for lust, but for lineage and for the realm. We must preserve what we have built." She exhaled, tension easing from her body. "We can wed in the Valyrian tradition, quietly, or with modest ceremony. Let the rest of Westeros see that the Targaryens stand apart, forging a future free from favoritism." Aegon closed his eyes briefly. Behind his eyelids he saw flickers of the past, the ashes of Harrenhal, the swirl of banners in the Blackwater camp, the shining new seat of the Hall of Concord. All their efforts had led to this moment. With a breath he opened his eyes. "Then it shall be. Visenya Targaryen, we will wed. May the realm accept it as they have accepted our dragons and our dream." Rhaenys' features were touched by sadness and pride in equal measure. She took Aegon's other hand. "And I will stand beside you both as your sister and your queen in all but name. Should I one day seek a husband as well, we will weigh that choice carefully." So it was decided. Within days, rumors fluttered through King's Landing that Aegon intended to wed his own sister as Valyrian custom permitted. Whispers abounded in taverns and alleyways, some outraged, some indifferent, many simply curious. The small folk, having heard so many tales of Targaryen strangeness, did not riot in the streets. They had grown accustomed to the idea that the silver-haired dragon riders were different. The lords, on the other hand, reacted with a mix of shock and relief, shock that Aegon would so openly flout Westerosi taboo, relief that he was not elevating a single house above the others. A brief flutter of protest emerged from the faith. Some septons in the Crownlands muttered that incest was an abomination. Others, more pragmatic, pointed out that the Targaryens had never bent to the faith's strictures as other houses did, and that the realm was at peace precisely because of Targaryen power. The High Septon in Old Town was cautious, neither blessing nor condemning the union, instead saying that if it was truly the will of the realm's guardians, the Seven would judge them in their own time. The wedding itself was a modest affair, at least by royal standards, held on Dragonstone rather than in King's Landing to emphasize the Targaryens' ancient seat and heritage. Dozens of lords and knights arrived by ship, curious to witness this Valyrian ceremony. Carved pillars and old tapestries from the Targaryens' lineage set the scene in the island's central hall. Rhaenys presided as a witness, her face set in an uncertain smile. Aegon and Visenya performed the ancient rites, binding their hands with a dragon-scale ribbon, speaking words in High Valyrian that few in Westeros understood, calling upon the memories of old Valyria rather than the Seven or the old gods. When it was done, cheers mixed with uneasy murmurs. Some Stormlander lords found the ceremony strange but bent the knee anyway, congratulating the couple. Mern Gardner, urbane and polished, offered a toast with arbor gold, proclaiming that the union symbolized House Targaryen's commitment to remain above petty politics. Loren Lannister, standing near the back, observed with a neutral expression. Torrance Stark did not attend in person, though he sent a guarded note of congratulations, presumably having known all along that events would proceed in this manner. The newlywed Targaryens shared a symbolic first flight as husband and wife. Visenya mounted Vhagar, Aegon took Balerion, and they rose into the sky over Dragonstone, a pair of dragons swirling in the crisp air. Rhaenys watched from the castle ramparts, mare axes by her side, as black and green wings danced together. She breathed a silent prayer that this decision would indeed shield the realm from division, rather than spark new tensions. In the weeks that followed, the talk in King's Landing revolved around the Targaryen marriage. Yet, for all the scandal among septons and the curious chatter of courtiers, no rebellion brewed. The other kings seemed to recognize that this was the least dangerous path, for Aegon remained neutral in marriage and thus unaligned with any single kingdom's bloodline. Meanwhile, the Confederation's daily workings continued. Trade disputes, road construction, coin minting, matters of local justice. The realm carried on, overshadowed by dragons yet not stifled by them. 1 month after the wedding, an official session in the Hall of Concord reaffirmed the pact. The kings, the lords, and the Targaryens announced a renewed commitment to mutual defense and cooperation. A wave of applause echoed in the chamber. From her seat, Rhaenys watched how Argilac and Loren exchanged firm handshakes, how Mern offered a grin to Lord Tully. She spotted the new master of ships, a man from the Riverlands, conferring with a Stormlander about potential improvements in naval coordination. Across the table, Aegon and Visenya sat side by side, exuding an almost solemn unity. Quietly, Rhaenys marveled at how far they had come from the day the Targaryens first landed on that patch of beach. She recalled the nightmares of scorching fields and endless slaughter, visions that had once haunted Aegon, prompting him to seek a better way. No one could say how long the realm would remain at peace or whether the children of these lords would one day cast aside the pact. But for now at least, Westeros was not a mosaic of warring kingdoms. It was a confederation bound by choice and compromise, protected by dragons who, ironically, had brought the gift of peace instead of endless conquest. Yet history is a fickle tapestry, and even in times of stability, storms can gather at the edges. Far in the north, rumors of strange sightings beyond the wall came trickling south, whispers of wights and corpses walking in the snow. Maesters largely dismissed such stories as the same old fables that surfaced every winter. But the Night's Watch, starved of recruits, kept sending anxious reports. Torrhen Stark took them seriously, preparing to journey to the Wall himself at the next opportunity. To the south, Dorne remained aloof. Some travelers claimed that Princess Meria was dying and that her heir might prove even more stubborn. Or maybe more open, no one could say. The Dornish were notoriously unpredictable, as fierce in defending their independence as the sands were unyielding under the sun's glare. In the east, Bravos and Pentos churned with their own intrigues, while Volantis threatened expansion. A few bold Essosi traders found their way to King's Landing, bringing news of exiled warlords or petty tyrants across the sea. Though no immediate threat loomed, Aegon remembered too well the lessons of Valyria's doom. Greatness could shatter overnight if pride ran too high. Within House Targaryen itself, the newly married Aegon and Visenya faced the question of children. If Visenya bore a child, would that child inherit the mantle of Dragon Rider and caretaker of the Confederation? Likely yes. But what if Rhaenys, too, took a husband eventually or had a child by some other arrangement? The intricacies of lineage would become entangled. Yet for now, the Targaryens did not rush. They had secured the immediate future of their bloodline. Time would tell what next steps might unfold. Meanwhile, the realm's energies poured into forging new wonders. The roads improved further, with major highways now linking King's Landing to Storm's End, to Riverrun, to Lannisport, to Highgarden, and even pushing north toward Moat Cailin. Along these highways rose hostels and guarded inns, while local merchants thrived. Trade caravans that once risked bandits every few miles now traveled under the watchful eyes of Confederation patrols. Armies were not needed to maintain peace, only small garrisons at key points. The memory of Harren's downfall and the knowledge that dragons could be summoned if necessary kept open rebellion at bay. As these highways reached their final stretches, farmers and innkeepers near the crossroad junctions grew wealthy. A new middle class of merchants blossomed, forging business ties that transcended old feudal lines. While the High Lords still held their lands, they found themselves relying more on trade revenues than on tithes from warlike raids or forced tribute. Step by step, the shape of Westeros changed. So the seasons turned, and with them the harvests, festivals, births, and burials that marked the slow march of time. In King's Landing, the Hall of Concord became an ever louder place of arguments and laughter, deals and decrees. Sometimes minor wars threatened to flare up, only to be snuffed out by a swift resolution brokered under the gaze of the Targaryens. Sometimes a noble family or two tested the boundaries, but the Confederation as a whole remained firm, and no one dared stand alone against the collective wrath nor risk a day of dragonfire. And at the apex of it all stood Aegon Targaryen, now wed to Visenya, both wearing the subtle gravitas of those who bore the weight of a realm's fragile unity. Rhaenys, ever the beloved presence among the small folk, continued to travel widely, singing songs in castle halls and marketplaces alike, reminding the people that House Targaryen was not some distant, uncaring power. The three dragons, Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, roamed the skies, occasionally glimpsed by farmers who shielded their eyes against the sun, hearing the thunder of colossal wings before the shapes vanished behind a cloud bank. For most of the realm, this was a golden era, or close enough to it. No large-scale wars, taxes that did not crush the peasantry, roads that fostered commerce, and an overarching structure that prevented the old cycle of constant bloodshed. In quiet hearthside conversations, elders marveled at how quickly things had changed. Children grew up without the terror of hearing that an enemy army might appear over the next hill. Minstrels composed ballads not of heroic battles but of the day the kings sat together as allies. Of course, not all was perfect. There were still feuds, crimes, plagues, and storms. Hunger never vanished entirely. Lords still schemed to expand their influence. The world remained the world, harsh, uncertain. Yet there was a sense that, for once, Westeros had found a path that did not inevitably lead to ruin. The Targaryens stood guard on that path, urging each kingdom onward, hoping that in time the Confederation would become so interwoven that it no longer depended solely on dragons. In the final year of Argilac Durandon's life, a new test arose when he took ill at Storm's End. With no direct heirs, the question of who would inherit the Stormlands threatened to ignite a local power struggle among lesser Stormlord houses, Baratheon, Swan, Tarth, and others. Usually, such a succession crisis would devolve into open war. But now they had the Confederation's council to appeal to. Argilac, bedridden, summoned Aegon and King Loren, whom he had once scorned, to Storm's End to bear witness to his final declarations. Aegon and Visenya flew in on their dragons, landing outside the mighty curtain walls. Torrhen Stark sent Brandon once more, representing the north. Mern, Ronal Arryn, and Lord Tully arrived by ship and road, prepared to ensure no chaos erupted. The old Storm King, his once imposing frame thin and ravaged by fever, mustered enough vigor to greet them, coughing weakly. "Damn my body for failing," he croaked to Aegon, half laughing at his own impending end. "I always thought I'd fall in battle." Aegon took the old man's hand gently, mindful of how their relationship had evolved from suspicion to a grudging respect. "You have served your kingdom well. Let your house endure in peace." Argilac closed his eyes, exhaling. "I name a cousin's son as my heir. He's young but not a fool. The council must approve him. I'll not have Storm's End devolve into a battlefield." After all these years, no one can say Argilac was the first to break the pact. He died 2 nights later, the raging storms outside Storm's End strangely calm, as though nature itself paused to mark his passing. The new claimant was Argilac's distant kin, a boy of barely 8. Many Storm Lords rolled their eyes at such a choice, but the presence of the entire Confederation at Storm's End made it clear that no immediate rebellion would be tolerated. A regency was formed, with local lords appointed but subject to oversight from the council. Order prevailed. On that day, as the sea winds battered the parapets, Aegon gazed out over the turbulent waters and felt the press of time. Another generation would soon take the stage. Argilac had been the last of the old guard, a man who remembered an era of fractured kingdoms. Now, even the Stormlands would be governed by someone who grew up knowing only the Confederation. Would these younger lords and ladies treasure the peace they inherited, or chafe under constraints they never asked for? The question was unanswerable. All Aegon could do was keep walking the path he had chosen, trusting that each year of stability further anchored the pact. The Targaryens remained vigilant, mindful of every shifting alliance, every rumor of foreign trouble, every local feud that might spiral if left untended. That vigilance, more than dragon fire, preserved the dream. When the sky cleared over Storm's End, the visiting kings and lords departed, some by ship, others on horseback, or by dragon's wing. Aegon and Visenya flew back to King's Landing, Rhaenys trailing behind on Meraxes. Settling onto the wide field near the city, they found peasants clapping or waving from a distance. A small group of children had gathered to stare at the dragons, eyes bright with wonder rather than fear. One girl, no more than 5, squealed in delight when Balerion roared, as though enthralled by the living myth. Aegon slid from the saddle, smiling faintly at the crowd. He recalled how once, many years ago, the sight of a dragon on these shores would have provoked panic. Yet here were small folk who came forward with baskets of fruit and fish, offering gifts to the monstrous creatures. Times had changed indeed. That evening, by the light of the hearth in the royal apartments, Visenya poured wine for herself and Aegon. Rhaenys lounged on a cushioned bench, tired from the flight. Together, they reflected on Argilac's passing, the new child lord in the Stormlands, the quiet acceptance of Targaryen sibling marriage, the roads crisscrossing the realm, the hall of concord that grew busier with each passing month. "It feels as though we stand at a pinnacle," Rhaenys said softly, "with the realm arrayed before us in fragile harmony." Visenya took a sip of her wine. "Fragile, yes, yet it endures year after year because we will it, and because the lords have tasted the rewards of peace." Aegon leaned back in his chair, gazing into the fire. I wonder what our ancestors in Valyria would think if they saw this. They forged an empire with dragons subjugating countless peoples. And we have used dragons to keep the peace, forging an alliance instead. Rhaenys offered a gentle smile. I suspect they would be baffled or maybe proud. Perhaps both. Valyria was a place of wonders but also arrogance. We carry forward only the wonders, I hope. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the crackle of the logs. Beyond the windows, the city hummed. King's Landing, once an afterthought, was now a throbbing heart of trade and governance. Ships from distant shores lit the bay with their lanterns, wagons clattered on cobblestone streets, tavern music played somewhere far below. After a while, Aegon said, if ever we falter, the realm will break. We must stay vigilant, but we must also trust that others will rise to defend what we have built. One day, we will be gone. The next generation must carry on with or without dragons. Visenya slipped her hand into his. Then let us ensure the next generation is prepared. Perhaps we will have a child soon, a Targaryen heir who can be raised to honor the pact. Rhaenys set her wine cup aside, a shadow crossing her face. We are building for tomorrow, not just for ourselves. Let that be our guiding star. The three Targaryens watched the dying fire in silence, each lost in private reverie yet united in purpose. Their choice to treat the Seven Kingdoms as allies, not subjects, had ushered in a remarkable era, an era still beset with perils but bright with possibility. They had refused to seat themselves above all others on a throne of swords. Instead, they had built a round table of equals, sealed by the memory of Harrenhal's tragedy and the vow that no more kings need ever burn. In the years yet to come, they would face new storms. Births, deaths, alliances, betrayals, the stirrings of threats beyond the seas or the wall. Yet the seeds they had sown were growing into strong roots. Westeros was no longer a land of 7 warring kingdoms, but a realm of 7 pillars joined under one roof. No single man or woman wore a crown supreme. The dragons soared above, protectors rather than conquerors. And the Targaryens themselves, heirs to a fallen empire, clung to their new dream of forging peace from the crucible of power. So it was, in the time of Aegon the Conqueror who chose not to conquer, that the shifting tides of destiny brought forth a fragile golden age. Battles were fought not with swords but with words in the Hall of Concord. Roads spread across the map, binding hill and vale, frost and field, desert and forest. Merchants prospered, knights found new purpose, and even lords once hardened by centuries of war began to see advantage in cooperation. No one could say how long it would last. But while it did, the realm shone with a promise of what might be possible when ancient enmities yield to common cause, when the mighty hold themselves in check, when a man with dragons chooses to raise kingdoms rather than raise them. And that promise, so simple and yet so revolutionary, came to define the reign of Aegon Targaryen, the first to wear no single crown but to hold aloft the unity of all.